Ryan had been hiking alone for years. It wasn't that he didn't like company, but the wilderness felt more honest when it was just him and the quiet. This time, he chose a rarely visited stretch in Appalachia, wanting to push further off the beaten path than usual. The forecast promised mild weather, and the autumn leaves colored the forest in fiery reds and golds. After about 4 hours of trekking through dense brush, Ryan came upon a narrow gorge. It wasn't a grand canyon or anything, but deep enough to make his heart skip. A rocky creek babbled far below, its cold water catching the pale sunlight filtering through the trees. Across the gap was a massive fallen oak, wedged at an angle like a natural bridge. Ryan inspected the tree carefully. The bark was smooth in places where it had worn from weather and, likely, other hikers. It seemed sturdy enough. He tested his weight slowly, focusing intently as he balanced across. Once safely on the other side, Ryan exhaled sharply, feeling a rush of adrenaline. Then he heard it, a rhythmic thunking. Turning around, he spotted a man about 10 feet away, gripping a large axe. The man looked rough, his camo jacket stained and his beard ragged. He swung the axe again, this time chopping deeper into the wood. "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" Ryan shouted, heart pounding. The man didn't look up, his swings relentless. "Stop! That's how I just crossed," Ryan called, panic rising. Finally, the man glanced over with cold eyes. "That's not my problem," he said flatly. Ryan's anger flared. He shouted back insults and warnings, but the man simply kept hacking until the tree shifted, cracking dangerously. The man stepped back, axe at his side, eyes dark and hollow. "I know these woods better than you. You'll regret staying here," the man said before vanishing into the trees. Ryan stared at the damaged bridge, knowing it wouldn't hold his weight again. He pulled out his phone. No signal. Night was approaching fast, and he was trapped. Trying to find another crossing, Ryan wandered downstream. The gorge grew deeper, the terrain more unforgiving. Soon, he found a small clearing with a fire pit, but the scene sent chills down his spine. The trees were marked with strange carvings, symbols he didn't recognize. Rusted tools, animal bones, and bits of cloth were scattered about in disturbing patterns. He hurried away, but then he heard footsteps behind him, soft, slow, deliberate. Every time he turned, silence. Then he caught movement, figures lurking just beyond the tree line. He was being hunted. Panic surged as he broke into a desperate run. The forest echoed with guttural screams behind him. His legs burned, breath ragged. A fallen tree appeared, his only chance. He balanced across, heart hammering. He glanced back and saw 3 shadowy figures, dirty and menacing, closing in. One carried a pipe and snarled something unintelligible. They told him to leave and consider himself lucky. He didn't hesitate. Sprinting blindly, he finally burst onto a known trail, trembling and broken but alive. Ryan never forgot the man with the axe or the feeling that he'd been prey in a nightmare that was all too real. Emily loved the solitude of the northern Minnesota wilderness. She wasn't just a hiker. She was a wildlife photographer, chasing shots of wolves, owls, and other elusive animals. She preferred unmarked trails, the kind of places most people never dared to explore. On this particular October morning, the forest was silent except for the crunch of fallen leaves under her boots. The air was crisp, and the fog hung low among the pines, creating long, shifting shadows. She had been hiking for hours when she realized she was off her usual route. The landmarks she had memorized looked unfamiliar. She paused, studying her map and compass, but nothing matched. Her stomach sank. She knew she was lost. The thrill of adventure faded quickly into unease. She decided to keep moving downhill, hoping to stumble across a creek or some recognizable clearing. Then she heard it, a soft rustling behind her, like leaves brushing against each other. She froze. It wasn't the wind. It was deliberate. She spun around, camera in hand, but saw nothing. She told herself it was probably a deer or a raccoon, but a creeping feeling of being watched gnawed at her. The rustling continued, keeping pace with her, coming from every direction now. Suddenly, she saw the shapes. 6 wolves emerged from the fog, their fur blending with the shadows. But these weren't ordinary wolves. Their eyes were unnervingly intelligent, and their movements deliberate, almost coordinated. They didn't circle her in a natural hunting pattern. They flanked her, subtly pushing her toward a narrow ravine. Her heart pounded in her chest, and she gripped her camera, now useless as a defense. She tried to remember her training. Make herself look big, stay calm, move slowly. The wolves mirrored her hesitation, their eyes tracking her every twitch. But when she took a cautious step backward, one of the wolves growled, low and menacing. The others stiffened. She realized that whatever she was dealing with, it was no ordinary predator. These creatures were intelligent, almost methodical. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, the wolves all froze. Their ears shot up, bodies taut. They all turned toward a sound she hadn't heard, a soft cracking of branches deeper in the forest. Within moments, they scattered, running in unison away from whatever had arrived. Emily blinked, stunned and relieved, heart still hammering in her ears. For a brief moment, she felt safe again. But the forest didn't return to normal. The fog seemed thicker now, suffocating in its density. As she moved cautiously forward, she noticed markings on the trees, scratches and strange symbols, similar to talismans, etched deep into the bark. Animal bones, arranged in patterns, littered the ground. This wasn't the work of the wolves. Something else was here, something that had scared them. As night fell, she realized she had wandered too far into a part of the forest no one should tread. The darkness pressed in, muffling even the wind. She stumbled across an abandoned campsite, a few feet from the creek. The fire pit was cold, but she noticed footprints around it, human but ragged, some barefoot, some wearing torn shoes. It was clear whoever had been here moved stealthily and deliberately. She had no signal on her phone and no way to call for help. Her survival instincts kicked in. She decided to keep moving toward higher ground, hoping the next ridge would give her a vantage point. The forest grew denser, the sound strange, whispers she couldn't place, rustling branches, and then laughter, low and almost playful, echoing in the distance. She ran, tripping over roots and rocks, lungs burning. The shadows seemed to move in her peripheral vision, always just out of reach. Hours later, exhausted and terrified, Emily reached a small clearing by a frozen pond. She stopped to catch her breath. The reflection of the moon on the ice revealed shapes at the tree lean. Figures, not quite human, moving silently, watching. Her camera flashed instinctively, capturing their silhouettes before she bolted downhill toward the only trail she could remember. By dawn, she stumbled onto a dirt path used by logging vehicles. She collapsed, trembling, eyes wide with disbelief. The wolves hadn't followed her, and the strange figures were gone. She reported nothing to authorities, who would believe her story. It felt like the forest itself had orchestrated the terror, sending her a message she couldn't ignore. Emily never returned to those woods. Even on safer trails, she felt eyes on her, the sensation of being watched lingering like a shadow that refused to leave. The silence of the wilderness was no longer comforting. It was ominous, a reminder that some predators weren't animals, and some dangers were older and smarter than she could ever imagine. That Ryan had always been the type to seek out extreme solitude. An amateur survivalist and urban escape artist, he loved the northern Minnesota backcountry because it felt endless, unclaimed, untamed. It was mid-October, and the forest was a tapestry of gold, red, and brown. He had packed light, carrying only a small backpack, a knife, a few cans of food, and a sleeping bag. Cell service was non-existent here, but that was part of the appeal. He wanted to disconnect. By late afternoon, Ryan found a small clearing by a creek and decided to set up camp. The trees were dense, the air thick with the smell of wet leaves and moss. He lit a small fire, letting the orange glow push back the creeping shadows. As the flames danced, he listened to the forest, the wind, the distant calls of birds, the gurgle of the creek. Everything felt normal, almost serene. Then he noticed footprints around the clearing. They weren't fresh. but they weren't old either. Human footprints, small and oddly spaced, circled the fire before vanishing into the woods. A chill ran down his spine, but he brushed it off as an animal or a hiker passing through. He reminded himself that fear often played tricks on the mind, especially when alone. Night fell, and with it came the oppressive silence of the wilderness. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves sounded amplified. He kept glancing into the darkness, half expecting to see a deer or a fox. Instead, shadows moved unnaturally, bending in ways that shouldn't have been possible. The hair on his arms stood on end. He told himself to stay calm and focused. Hours later, he woke to the sound of someone, or something, whispering his name. At first, he thought it was a dream, the wind playing tricks. But the whispers grew louder, clearer. Ryan grabbed his knife and scanned the tree line. The moonlight revealed movement, figures stepping between the trees. They weren't entirely human. Their bodies were tall, gangly, with elongated limbs that seemed to stretch unnaturally. Their faces were obscured by shadow, but their eyes glimmered faintly, reflecting the firelight. Ryan ran. He didn't bother packing anything, just sprinted toward the path he thought led back to civilization. The figures followed silently, never breaking a sprint, keeping pace with him without making a sound. He stumbled over roots, cutting his palms and knees, but he didn't stop. The forest seemed endless, the darkness oppressive, and every time he glanced back, the figures appeared closer, though he swore he hadn't gained on them. He ducked into a narrow ravine, thinking he could lose them among the dense trees. That's when he saw the remnants of old campfires, hundreds of them, each surrounded by carved symbols and arranged in deliberate patterns. Bones, animal and human alike, lay scattered around, some charred black. The forest felt alive, watching him. He realized with horror that these creatures, or whoever had made this place their lair, were orchestrating his path, guiding him deeper into their domain. Exhausted and desperate, Ryan stumbled onto a ridge. Below him was a small abandoned cabin, half collapsed, with smoke curling from a chimney. Hope surged through him. He sprinted down the hill, only to see the figures emerge from the woods, surrounding the cabin. They didn't rush him, didn't attack immediately. They just watched. Frozen in terror, Ryan realized the cabin wasn't a refuge. It was a trap. The door creaked open, and he heard laughter, low, guttural, and impossibly human. Inside, the fire flickered, revealing symbols etched into the walls, matching those he had seen outside. Piles of bones sat in corners, arranged with an almost ritualistic care. And at the center of the room, a small figure sat cross-legged, cloaked in shadows, whispering softly, chanting in a language Ryan didn't recognize. Panic overtook him. He turned to flee, but the figures were everywhere now, silently moving through the trees like ghosts. He ran into the creek, the icy water soaking him as he tried to escape, but the forest had closed in. Branches snagged his clothes, roots tore at his shoes. He tripped, and the chanting seemed to swell, echoing around him from all sides. Somehow, Ryan made it to a fallen log spanning a narrow ravine, similar to stories he had heard of other hikers. He scrambled across, balancing precariously as the figures advanced behind him. Once across, he didn't stop running. Branches lashed at his face, roots tore at his legs, but he pushed forward, driven by sheer terror. Hours later, just as dawn cracked through the fog, Ryan stumbled onto a main logging road. The forest behind him was silent again. No figures, no whispers, no eyes in the shadows. He collapsed, shaking, soaked, and bleeding. He left the woods without a second thought, never looking back. Years later, he would tell a few trusted friends what he had seen, but no one believed him. The forest had a reputation now, a reputation for swallowing those who dared venture too deep, for hiding its secrets behind fog and trees. Ryan never returned. The forest remained, unchanged and patient, waiting for the next person to stumble too far from the path, to follow the wrong sound, to hear whispers in the darkness. He knew one thing for certain. Some places in the world weren't meant to be explored. Some horrors were patient, intelligent, and eternal. The forest didn't need to chase you. It just needed to exist. And if you wandered too far, it would claim you, one way or another.